Oh, very sorry, I missed the slide, and I come back with the presentation. And again, it's the content of the presentation. And firstly, I will introduce some background and the motivation why I do this research. And firstly, uh, why powerful the deep learning models are difficult to interpret. So we treat it as black box. So every time we use a deep learning model, we don't know how it works internally. So we need interpretation to interpret how the deep learning models work. What is the interpretability in machine learning? So one definition is interpretability is a degree to which human can understand the cause of a decision or the causality. So there are some works on the interpretability in machine learning, so that can explain the decision of a deep learning model. For example, here they generate a counterfactual explanation to explain a prediction of a model. This separation is a ruby-throated hummingbird, and the counter class is a muskrat, and they generate a sentence to explain why this picture is a ruby-throated hummingbird and not a muskrat. Also, there are work they try to visualize how a channel in a deep neural network is looking for. For example, in a channel of a VCC network it is looking for the school birds, like in the bottom left corner. And there another work called operation different analysis. In this work, they highlight the evidence and the against for a prediction. This picture they predict is a cockatoo. Actually, I don't know is what is a cockatoo, but it's kind of bird. And the red dots are the evidence that support this prediction, and the blue dot is against. That means that you contradict the prediction. And the last work, they prove that in the earlier layers of a deep learning model, it look for the color or the texture of an object, and in deeper layer, for example, layer 3, layer 4, or layer 5, it will capture more detailed objects or more specific features. So this is the background of the interpretable machine learning. And then we come to continual learning. I assume that all of you know the definition of continual learning. So it's built on the idea of learning continuously and adaptively about the external world, and enabling the autonomous incremental development of ever complex skills and knowledge. For example, in this figure, we can see that firstly we train on leopard, and then we wanna learn to classify the zebra also. So the continual learning algorithms will enable you to learn every classes, new classes, and old classes without forgetting or acceptable degree of forgetting. Uh, when we introduce new illness, it will cause catastrophic forgetting or semantic drift. So here you see, firstly we train on tiger or leopard, and then we train on zebra. So the feature or the channel of the deep neural network, you train the role to detect the zebra features. So if you forget how to classify a leopard or a tiger. Again, in 2013, Jan Gottfellow conducted research, and they showed that every network optimized on gradient-based algorithms will suffer catastrophic forgetting. However, this problem is stated firstly in 1989 by McCloskey. So when you conduct continual learning, remember to cite this paper. And the definition of catastrophic forgetting is quite new definition, so I will state it again. So catastrophic forgetting is defined when we use a trained model on a given domain to address a new task. Due to adapting to the new data samples, the model forgets what it learned before on the old domain. So catastrophic forgetting naturally happens on computer vision. For example, object detection. Firstly, we train on person, then we train on horse. But at this time, the model will fail to predict future and it cannot detect future but detect horse correctly. And also in semantic segmentation, I get it from Uberto Micheli. And again, when we just use fine tuning, the segmentation performance will disastrously degraded. And also in image captioning, for example, we have a cat photo. So the caption will be a cat laying on a bed next to a blanket. But if we just use fine tuning, if you forget the cat and the new caption will be shifted to a person is standing in an orange room and it's totally irrelevant. So the objective that I conduct this research is I wanna explain catastrophic forgetting and give visualization how this phenomenon happens. And also I wanna provide insights and summarization how to deal with catastrophic forgetting for future research based on the investigation from my tool. So there are two or three related works. The first one, as mentioned, is the operation difference analysis. In this work, they will try to highlight the evidence for operation. For example, the red pixels are evidence for the operation ostrich, and the blue dots are the contradiction for the operation. And I will not delve into the how this algorithm work. Another work they try to understand the catastrophic forgetting is toward understanding catastrophic forgetting in continual learning in last year. And the authors concern what factors affect catastrophic forgetting. So they define two characteristics. The first one is a total complexity, and the next one is a sequential heterogeneity. The complexity is the distance of a new task compared to a base task, and the base task is considered is a trivial task. And the heterogeneity is a difference between each task with each other. And this is a result of the research, and they conducted on the synaptic intelligence and variational continual learning. And with the complexity, you can see a high correlation. It means that if in the future you wanna design a continual learning benchmark, you should care about the total complexity of the task sequence. And the low correlation or even negative correlation indicate that the difference between tasks will not much affect the catastrophic forgetting. And I get this figure from Vincenzo, and I quite agree with this categorization, as at this time, continual learning algorithms are divided into three strategies: architecture, regularization, and rehearsal. So in architecture, we will somehow tweak the architecture to adapt with new tasks without forgetting the old problem. And in regularization, we will train the objective function, and we will penalize the chain, or we will mimic the consolidation mechanism. Lastly, the rehearsal strategies, we will use the old data, or even we use the pseudo data from the generative model. So, however, there is no work conducting uh, try to try to moderate the catastrophic forgetting by using the knowledge how catastrophic forgetting internally happens in a network. So in this work, I will try to mitigate the catastrophic forgetting by the investigation from my tool. And the approaches of this work, I propose a tool called Catastrophic Forgetting Dissector or CFD. In this tool, the input will be the gradual segmentation of picture, and we will try to compare the visualization of the model with each other, and from that you can infer what is the forgetting block. I will come to the details in the later slides. And the experiment scenario I follow like this. Firstly, we will train on a number of classes to get a base model. For example, in this figure, you can see M19 is a base model for this experiment. And then we add classes sequentially to observe the catastrophic forgetting. So the order will be person, sport ball, TV, toilet, and model. And about the input, the graduate segmentation, I get it from MS Coco 2014. So if in the M in the M19, we will have to get a representative feature map, because in a block of a deep neural network, we have many channels, and each channel will generate a feature map. So we have to choose just one feature map from many feature maps in one block. So how can I choose the representative feature map in layers of M19? It's a base model. So I compare the computer vision, the result of Bayesian difference analysis with the semantic segmentation graduate, and I just pick the feature map having the highest overlapping with the semantics with the gradual segmentation. Also, when I have another model, for example, if in this figure I have the base model M19, and I add one more class and I get M20, so I need to pick the representative feature maps from M20. So how can I do that? I compare the computer vision of the M20 and M19, and also I will pick the feature maps on M20 having the highest IOU overlapping with the M19. So and I record the IOU values, and I draw the IOU slope, IOU like this. So for example, if we have a ResNet, we will have a 5 convolutional blocks, right? So I draw like IOU like this, and I observe the IOU drop, and to determine which layer is forgetting the most. For instance, in this figure, you can see the most forgetting happens, the biggest IOU drop is observed on the block tree. So we can somehow conclude that with this figure, the model is forgetting the most on the block tree, and the block tree is the weakest block. And this is the algorithm that I propose. It's also the workflow for the CFD. And the output will be the layer that forgetting the most. For example, in this figure, it will be block tree. And when I know which layer is forgetting the most, I will apply the critical freezing. It just will freeze the layer that causes the catastrophic forgetting. Firstly, we thought that just freezing the block tree will help, but it's not correct, because the activation, the computer vision of the block tree is attributed by the block 1 and block 2, right? So we try to freeze, or we apply a very tiny learning rate on the block 1 and block 2 to moderate the catastrophic forgetting on block 3. And in the experiments and evaluation, I will show you some results and prove the effectiveness of our approaches. In the experiments and evaluation for to manage the incremental steps in image captioning, we use split MS Coco. It's a data set for continual image captioning. And again, we will come back to the experimental scenario. Firstly, we get a base model M19, and then we add more classes sequentially. And with our visualization, we also analyze how the classifier work. And you can see here, if we just add a class person, it will still predict correctly Egyptian cat. But in the last sequence, in the last step, if we add spot ball, TV, toilet, and model, the prediction of the classifier, I mean the feature extractor in the image captioning model will say that it's your child is forgetting quite catastrophically. And to generalize the observation, we try to run our tool on many images. And for example, we choose a bicycle, car, and some very outstanding classes in MS Coco. And the result of the CFD assert that the third layer is a weakest block. And based on this table, we will freeze the block 1 and block 2, or we apply very tiny learning rate during training. And this is our current result. And you can see critical freezing is quite outperformed and even have a comparable performance with learning without forgetting. But learning without forgetting is a much more complicated. And it's also outperform the knowledge distillation, and I will give you the reference later. But the two approaches of knowledge distillation is applied on a paper on the ICCP workshop recently. And we also compare with the fine tuning, it's a baseline. And we also try to freeze the encoder or the decoder, and we try to freeze each layer, each block of the convolutional network to ensure that by correctly freezing the critical layers, we really can have the better performance. And on the new task, the critical freezing really help. We have a good generalization, and it outperform learning without forgetting, knowledge distillation, or other baseline methods. And this is the qualitative result of this. So in the old figure, only let us see, only learning without forgetting and critical freezing classify a cat correctly in the caption. Here you can see a man is holding a cat in a kitchen, and a cat is sitting in a kitchen. And in the new task, almost every model can predict this is a man, but the critical freezing have the best caption: a man is standing on snow with a table. And the observations, we have some findings on this research about the catastrophic forgetting. So again, we can see the visualized results so that in the first and second blocks of ResNet, it can overall capture the outline of the objects, and the computer vision turn to represent more detailed features from the objects and other background features. And the evidence does not change even forgetting happens. This suggests that the importance of evidences to the final prediction differ. And lastly, unlike the constantly decreasing trend we see when we compare the M24 and M20, the decreasing rate of the M24 and M19 fluctuates through the block, and a severe drop at block 3. So that's all the result of our work, and we come to conclusion and future works. So in this paper, we introduce CFD to grasp catastrophic forgetting, the investigation of our tools under the mystical question about the catastrophic forgetting, how it happens, and which layer is the victims of catastrophic forgetting. The experiments illustrate the superiority of our approaches, and we believe that our findings will really benefit the fine-tuning schemes, because at this time when you use fine-tuning, you will pick the layer heuristically. For example, you just pick a few early layers, or you pick some layers to, and you hope that you will get the good feature. But our tool will show you which convolutional blocks should be transferred and used in fine-tuning. And also, critical freezing could benefit a variety of continual learning approaches, ranging from regularization or dynamic architecture. So it can play as a supplementary role. And the future works, we really want to scale this work to other tasks. For example, segmentation or object detection, or the deeper networks, for example, BZZ or GoogleNet. But we will leave it for the future works. And at this time, in this work, we chose dissect the forgetting in the CNN, but the RNN is now being overlooked. And although it's very hard to understand the RNN, the mechanism, unless using attention mechanism, but we believe that the RNN decision will really benefit the research. Yeah, that's all my work. So I will expect your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
Maybe I can start with a simple question. So
Okay.
first of all, it's interesting that there's no, let's say, a linear correlation between the forgetting of each block and the, let's say, distance from the input space. So I think that it's a nice insight, and I think that it would be nice to see if that thought holds also with different architectures, models, as you were saying, as for future research. But I have a question with respect to the feature maps that you consider in your metric, forgetting metric. So you said that you use some specifically selected feature maps, but have you tried to use all the feature maps or other strategies to select the feature maps?
Thank you, Vincenzo. The question is, in the choosing the feature map in a one block, I am using all the feature maps or just one, right? So actually, I use all the feature maps, but when choosing the representative feature map, I just choose one, because there are many feature maps in one block. For example, in the block 1 of the ResNet, you can even have some hundreds of feature maps. So I just pick one feature map from the block 1, and again in block 2, I pick one, and so on. So I choose, how can I choose the feature maps? For example, if in the base model, for example, M19, I will compare all the feature maps in the block 1 with the gradual segmentation, and I pick the feature map that have the evidence and the gradual segmentation IOE overlap that having highest degree, and so on. And again, to choose a feature map on the later models, for example, M20, I will compare the visualizations of the M20 with the feature map that I picked on the M19. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I think we have another question from Dario Gardamone. And Dario, do you want to speak, or do you want to write your question in the chat?
No, well, if you can listen, I can talk.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Jen, for the presentation. Very clever idea to visualize how a convolutional network actually work. And I'm not an expert, and maybe it's a very silly question that I raise. And it's since we know that the first layer of a convolutional neural network tends to learn. Uh, so again, I rephrase. Since we know that following the depth of the neural network, different layers learn different features, structure. So from simple to complex. How do you think this could affect your way of doing intersection with respect to the true label? So does it have an effect? Do you investigate these things, or what's your talk about this?
Mm,
So in different layers, it is likely that the activation map actually are pointing to different feature. In the
oh,
latest layer, I would expect that the IOU with the predicted labels and activation is much higher than in the first one, but maybe it's not what you observed in your studies. I don't know.
yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's a good question, and I'm not really sure about that, but I wanna say because the activation of the deeper layers is affected by the earlier layers, right? So we cannot say that. Mm, sorry, Dario, I don't get your question very clearly. So can you write the question?
Um, it's it's as I said, maybe it's a very silly interpretation of comparing the label with activation of the different layers.
Ah,
Okay. My question is very not that interesting, but is it's like comparing the activation with the label from the very first layer to the last one. Wouldn't you, w- even
ah,
if that wasn't any catastrophic forgetting, how would this comparison? Have you observed a trend that is similar to what you reported? Even if even in maybe in standard setting, that's my question. So in not continual learning, but in classical I don't know, segmentation task, how would these things work? You have
uh,
an in.
mm, so I think this case cannot happen because if the forgetting happens in the earlier layers, the last layer label cannot be similar.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have other questions for John?
So I have a question. So can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, I just want to understand critical freezing. So I mean, just my question very specifically is this. So you're using this CFD, I mean, to know which block is deviating too much, and
Yeah,
you're freezing all the previous layers, and you're calling it critical freezing.
yeah,
Is this
correct.
critical? Is this what critical freezing is, or is there something more to critical freezing than this?
Yeah, yeah. It just we I just try to freeze the previous layer of the most weakest layer.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, I mean, so normally when we, so the meaning of that is that so you identify the block
yeah,
and all the previous layers will be of very simple features and all subsequent layers will be complex features. So usually these complex features are very specific to a given task. So that is where catastrophic forgetting comes in, right? I mean, you have to make some adjustments like regularization or dynamic
Yeah,
architectural changes at the later layers, right? I mean, I
yeah,
just want to understand that part.
yeah. You're right. So that's why I said that our approach can play a complementary role in other controlling techniques, for example, regularization or lecture.
Okay,
So,
okay. So regularization of later layers is still part of critical freezing. Is that what you're saying?
no, at this time we just perform catastrophic as critical freezing only. But in the future, we can integrate the critical freezing with other controlling techniques, for example, regularization, something like this.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I just, sorry for extending it. So, I was just trying to understand highlight of your paper actually. So, so is it that you are trying to find, usually what we say is that later layers are more specific and early layers are very generic. So, are you trying to find the point where this transformation happens using the
Yeah,
CFD method? Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
for example, in type tuning, sometimes you just pick 2 or 3 or 4 earlier layers, right? But you don't know exactly what block should you choose. So CFD actually it will show you which layers should be transferred in type tuning.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, it will be interesting to see what you do in
Yeah,
future. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the most interesting insight of this work, Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's not that straightforward to identify where you want to freeze your network and which threshold, let's say, which level into your network is the right threshold for freezing the lower part. And it may be difficult for different tasks, maybe be difficult for different models. And this technique that Jan explained is useful in a sense because it's a way of choosing this layer automatically somehow.
Mm, you're right.
Great. So do we have any more question for this reading group session?
One more question. So I think it's very minor thing, I think. So when you're comparing any feature map with the background, I mean, ground truth, let's say for segmentation problem, how do you transform the feature map so that you can compare it with the ground truth? Do you use some deconvolution or something?
What do you mean by transform? Transform.
I mean, so feature map dimension will be different from ground truth dimensions, right?
Ah, uh, actually, we they have the same dimension. Actually, not I don't mention the dimension here because we just care about the evidence. For example, here you can see the red dot is the evidence. So we care about the overlapping between the red dot and the yellow dot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So if we don't have any more questions, thank you again, Jan, for your interesting talk. And of course, this video is going to be uploaded on YouTube. And we can open a discussion also on our forum. So Jan, if you please send me your slides so that we can upload them as well and people
Okay,
can take
sure.
a look at them. And thank you all again for joining. I'll see you next week for the next reading group session. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah. See you. See you next time.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.